You want me to marry you?" Evelyn Cross stared at the man standing over her like she'd misheard him through the rain still roaring in her ears. Her wedding dress was soaked through her veil, torn somewhere back on the road, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Cole Barrett didn't flinch. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he's already decided to solve. "I need a woman who can work. You need a roof. That's all this has to be." She should have said no. Every sensible part of her screamed it. But sensible hadn't saved her today.
Sherminek.
If this story already has you gripped, you're exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single episode. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The morning Evelyn Cross was supposed to become Mrs. Damien Hale, she stood at the back of Silverdale's only church and listened to the silence where a congregation should have been. The pews were half empty. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the absence of music, not the way Reverend Caldwell kept clearing his throat and checking the side door, not even the whispers threading through the women seated near the front. It was the empty pews. Damien had told her his family filled 3 rows on their own. She had believed him. She had believed most things he told her. Her sister Ruth stood beside her, adjusting the veil for the 4th time. "He's just late," Ruth said. "Men are always late to their own weddings." "Not men like Damien," Evelyn said. "He told me punctuality was a mark of character." Ruth said nothing after that. Evelyn waited 32 minutes. She knew the exact count because she watched the clock mounted above the vestibule doors. The one with the cracked face and the minute hand that stuttered every time it reached the quarter hour. 32 minutes, and then Damien's younger brother Wade walked through the side door with his hat in his hands and wouldn't look her in the eye. "He's not coming," Wade said. Evelyn heard the words. She understood them. Her mind processed the information the way you process news of a distant disaster. Something terrible. Something real but still somehow removed from the body, standing in satin and lace in the back of a church. "Why?" she said. It wasn't really a question. Wade turned his hat around in his hands. He said he reconsidered. He said you were fine, but that fine wasn't what he was looking for." A pause. "He left for Denver 2 days ago. He's already gone." The whispers in the church had stopped. Every woman in those pews was now watching her. Evelyn reached up and pulled the veil from her hair. She folded it once, set it on the pew beside her, and walked out of the church without looking at a single face. She heard Ruth calling her name behind her. She kept walking. She had nowhere to go. That was the truth. She came to grips with, somewhere between the church steps and the edge of town, the truth she'd been avoiding for months by filling her mind with wedding plans and new household arrangements. Her parents were 3 years in the ground. The house she'd grown up in had been sold to settle her father's debts. She had lived the last year in a boarding room above Silverdale's general store, paying the rent from wages she earned hemming dresses and mending coats for women who looked through her when they handed her their garments. Damien had been salvation. Or so she'd thought. She had no money. She had $6.40 in a coin purse tucked into her bodice, enough to buy 2 meals and a night's lodging. She had a wedding dress that cost her 3 weeks of earnings and would never be worn again. She had nothing else. The road out of Silverdale ran north toward the foothills, and she walked it because she didn't know what else to do with her legs. The sky had been overcast all morning, and by the time she cleared the last building on the edge of town, the rain came. Not a soft rain. A Montana rain, which is a different animal, entirely heavy and cold, and utterly indifferent to what you were wearing, or what kind of day you'd already had. She walked anyway. She walked until the satin was so waterlogged it dragged against her ankles. She walked until her shoes, which had been made for standing in a church, and not for roads, had rubbed the skin off both heels. She walked until the cold got into her shoulders and wouldn't leave, and her hands went from numb to painful, and then back to numb again. She wasn't thinking about Damien anymore. She wasn't thinking about much of anything. That was the mercy of exhaustion. It cleared the mind of everything except the next step. She took the next step, and the one after that. She was somewhere past the Callaway Creek crossing, maybe 4 miles out of town, when her legs simply stopped working. Not dramatically, no stumble, no cry. She sat down in the mud at the side of the road, the way you sit in a chair when you're very tired. And she looked at the gray sky overhead, and she thought, well, this is where I am. She didn't know how long she sat there before she heard the horse. Cole Barrett almost didn't see her. He was riding back from the north pasture, with his mind on a fence line that needed 3 new posts and a calf that had been limping since Tuesday, and the rain was thick enough to cut visibility down to 50 feet. He might have ridden right past the white heap at the road's edge if his horse cutter hadn't shied sideways and forced him to look. He pulled up, looked down at what appeared to be a woman sitting in the mud in a soaked white dress, not moving, staring at the sky. "You alive?" he called down. She turned her head and looked at him. "Yes." "You hurt?" "No." He studied her. She studied him back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You're going to catch your death sitting there," he said. "I'm aware," she said. Cole Barrett was 38 years old and had been running his ranch alone for 4 years since Margaret left and took their daughter and whatever warmth the house used to hold. He was not a man given to impulse. He thought before he acted. He calculated odds. He weighed costs. He looked at the woman in the road for 5 seconds, then swung down from Cutter's saddle. "Can you stand?" She tried. Her legs didn't cooperate. She made it halfway up and went back down with a sharp involuntary sound of frustration that told him more about her than anything she'd said so far. He offered his hand. After a pause that was exactly 1 beat too long to be casual, she took it. He brought her to the ranch. He didn't know what else to do with her. He sat her at the kitchen table and told his cook, Hattie, to bring something hot, and he stood in the doorway and watched the woman from the road wrap both hands around a mug of coffee and breathe steam into her face like she was trying to absorb warmth through her skin. "What's your name?" he asked. "Evelyn Cross." "Cole Barrett. This is Barrett Ranch." He paused. "Where were you going?" She looked up at him. Her eyes were gray, a particular shade of gray that was either very calm or very emptied out, and he couldn't tell which yet. "Nowhere specific." "Coming from where?" "Silverdale. I was supposed to get married this morning." He looked at the dress. What was left of it? "Supposed to." "He didn't come." She said it flatly, the way you state a fact about weather. "His brother told me he'd already left for Denver 2 days ago." Cole said nothing. He'd known men like that. He had no good words for them. "Do you have family?" he asked. "Somewhere you can go?" "No." She drank the coffee. "I don't." Cole stood there and did his calculations. He looked at the woman, mid-20s, hollow-eyed, stubborn in the set of her jaw, even now, even hollowed out, and sitting in ruined satin in a stranger's kitchen. He looked at his own house, which had 17 ranch hands eating at his table, and no one managing anything above the cooking line since Hattie turned 60 and told him plainly she could cook, but she could not run a household, and a man his age should know the difference. He'd been managing alone, badly. "Can you cook?" he asked. She blinked. "Some. Manage supplies. Keep accounts." She straightened slightly in the chair. "I kept accounts for the general store in Silverdale for 2 years." "Can you learn things you don't know?" She looked at him steadily. "I walked 4 miles in a wedding dress in a Montana rainstorm rather than beg anyone for help." "What do you think?" Cole almost smiled. "Almost. I need someone to run this house," he said. "Manage the kitchen, the stores, the accounts, the schedules. 17 men eat here. The household is behind on everything. Hattie does what she can, but she's old and her knees are going." He paused. "I can't pay wages I don't have. What I can offer is a roof, meals, and a position in this household that's legal and permanent." Evelyn set down the mug. "Legal and permanent," she repeated. "You mean marriage? A practical one. I'm not promising you anything beyond safety and honest work. I'm not..." He stopped, chose the words carefully. I'm not looking for what most people call a marriage. I'm looking for a partner to run this ranch. Those are different things. The silence stretched out long enough that Hattie, who had been pretending to be busy at the stove, gave up pretending and turned to watch openly. Why would you trust me? Evelyn asked. You don't know me. You didn't ask me for anything, Cole said. You sat in the road and waited to figure it out yourself. That tells me something. It tells you I was freezing to death. It tells me you don't beg. He met her eyes. I can work with someone who doesn't beg. Another silence. Evelyn looked at her hands around the mug. The knuckles were scraped raw where she'd caught herself falling on the road. She looked at those raw knuckles for a long time. I have conditions, she said. Cole raised an eyebrow. You're in no position for conditions. Everyone's in a position for conditions, she said. You just told me you need this arrangement as much as I do Mr. Barrett. That gives me a position. He studied her. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Let's hear them. Her conditions were 3. First, she would have her own room, her own space, and that space would be respected without question. Second, she would learn whatever skills this ranch required her to learn, and she would be taught without being condescended to. Third, if it ever became clear that the arrangement was causing harm to either of them, they would have the right to renegotiate. Not dissolve, she wasn't naive enough to think divorce was simple on the frontier. Renegotiate. Like business partners. Cole listened to all 3. When she finished, he said, Agreed, agreed, and agreed. She nodded. Then we have a deal. One condition on my side, he said. She waited. Don't lie to me about anything. If you can't do something, say so. If something's wrong, say so. I can manage problems. I can't manage surprises. I don't lie, she said. Everyone says that. I'm telling you because it's true, not because it sounds good. She met his eyes without wavering. I was raised to believe that honesty is the only currency that doesn't depreciate. My father said that. He was right about very little else, but he was right about that. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood. Hattie will find you dry clothes. Tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock, I'll show you the ranch and what needs doing. He headed for the door, then stopped. The men will have questions. About who you are. What do you want me to tell them? He thought about it. The truth. You're Evelyn Barrett, and you run this house. The rest is none of their business. He walked out before she could respond. Hattie waited until his boots were off the porch, and then turned from the stove with an expression that held about 40 years of accumulated female wisdom compressed into a single look. Well, Hattie said, you're either the bravest woman I've ever seen, or the most desperate one. Can it be both? Evelyn said. Hattie laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. Lord, girl, you might just be all right. Ciao. The next morning, Evelyn Cross became Evelyn Barrett, in a ceremony that took 11 minutes and involved Reverend Tully from the Millbrook settlement, who smelled of pine sap and asked no questions, which she appreciated more than she could say. Cole stood beside her at the kitchen table because there was no time to go anywhere else, and because neither of them wanted ceremony, and said the words in a flat, steady voice, and she said hers in a voice that she kept equally flat and equally steady through a sustained act of will. Hattie witnessed. The ranch hand Decker, who had been in the kitchen for coffee when Tully arrived, witnessed without being asked and seemed quietly honored by the inclusion. When it was done, Cole shook Tully's hand and showed him out, and Evelyn stood at the kitchen window and watched the Reverend ride away and understood that what had just happened was real and permanent and required her to now figure out what came next. You ready? Cole said from the doorway. She turned. Show me everything. He showed her everything. The kitchen store's first 3 months of dry goods that were inventoried wrong with flour listed twice and coffee not listed at all. She found the error in the first 10 minutes and said nothing except, I'll correct the ledger. Cole watched her run her finger down the columns and make notations in the margin and didn't say anything either. The bunkhouse schedule was next. 17 men, 3 rotation shifts, no documented pattern. Every man seemed to know when he worked, based on what the man beside him told him, which Cole admitted was a system built on goodwill and the assumption that no one would ever be sick or new. "How many men have you hired in the last year?" Evelyn asked. 3 new hands since spring. And they learned the rotations how. Cole paused. Decker showed them. And if Decker left, another pause, longer. "I see your point," he said. "I'll document the rotations. All 3 shifts who covers what happens when someone's out." She looked up from the ledger she'd been carrying since the kitchen. "I'll have it done by end of week." "That would take me a month," he said. It wasn't quite a compliment, but it wasn't not one either. The supply situation came next, and here Evelyn hit the first wall. She had household accounting experience, but she had never managed supplies for 17 working men. She didn't know feed weights. She didn't know how much a working horse consumed versus a resting one. She didn't know the difference in supply needs between the summer grazing months and the hard winter months. She said so directly. "I don't know this. Teach me." Cole looked at her. Then he sat down on a fence rail and started explaining, and she sat across from him and asked questions, and he answered everyone without impatience. And somewhere in the middle of it, between the discussion of winter feed calculations and the explanation of why you ordered more salt than you thought you needed, she understood that Cole Barrett was a man who knew his ranch the way other men knew their own names. He loved it, she realized. He just had no idea how to show that to anyone. The men had questions. Of course they did. Decker was first a sun-weathered man in his 40s with a face like a topographic map and the careful eyes of someone who'd survived enough winters to value information. He caught her at the water pump the second morning, apparently by accident, and actually not. "You're the new missus," he said. "Evelyn Barrett," she said. "Yes." "Cole's a good man," Decker said. "Straight dealing, fair. Works harder than any man on the payroll, including me, which I'd only admit to you because the others aren't here." A pause. "He's had some hard years." "Most people have," she said. "His wife left," Decker said, watching her face. 4 years back. Took the girl. He don't talk about it." "Then I won't ask about it," Evelyn said. Something in Decker's face settled a small adjustment like a door closing into its frame. "Fair enough," he said. "You need anything you ask me? I run the men." A beat. "And for whatever it's worth, those books in the kitchen were a disaster. Took him 20 minutes to find what he needed every time. You fixed that. The men noticed." He walked off before she could respond. The others were less direct and more complicated. There was a young hand named Briggs who wasn't unkind, but asked too many questions about where she'd come from. There was Moss, who was territorial about the kitchen stores and had to be firmly, carefully moved out of that territory. There was old Perkins, who seemed to have appointed himself the ranch's institutional memory and spent 3 days watching her before he said a single word, and then what he said was, "You hold a ledger like you mean it. That's good." Last woman who came through here held it like it might bite her. "What happened to her?" Evelyn asked. "She left inside a month. Couldn't manage the cold or the quiet." He squinted at her. "Can you manage the quiet?" She thought about 32 minutes in a church and 4 miles of road in the rain, and a stranger's kitchen table with $6.40 in her bodice. "I've been managing quiet my whole life," she said. Perkins nodded. "Good," he said, and walked away. The first real test came at the end of week 2. Cole had ridden out to the north pasture at first light, which he did most days, and Hattie's knees had chosen that morning to lock up entirely. And 3 ranch hands had come to the kitchen at once, with what amounted to 3 simultaneous small crises. Briggs had cut his hand on a wire fence, and it needed cleaning and wrapping. Moss had miscounted the grain sacks, and there was an apparent shortage that threatened the horses' afternoon feeding. And young Tommy, who was barely 17 and shouldn't have been on the fence crew at all, had gotten himself so thoroughly spooked by a cougar sighting that he was shaking in the doorway and couldn't articulate a coherent sentence. Evelyn looked at all three of them. "Tommy," she said. First, her voice completely level. "Sit down at the table. There's coffee. Drink it and tell me exactly where you saw the cat." Tommy sat. Tommy drank. Tommy talked. "Briggs," she said, moving to the supply shelf without looking at him. "Put your hand over the basin and don't move it. I'll be there in 30 seconds. She got to Moss last. "Show me the grain count." "Ma'am, I think we're short by—" "Show me the count first. Then we'll figure out if we're short." They went through the count together. They were not short. Moss had counted the wrong stack. He knew it before she said it, and when he realized it, the embarrassment in his face was so acute that Evelyn looked past him and continued talking in a practical voice that gave him somewhere to look other than directly at his own mistake. "Stack 2 needs relabeling. I'll have Hattie mark them when her knees are better." When Cole came back in the early afternoon, Briggs's hand was wrapped. Tommy had stopped shaking, the grain was correctly counted, and Evelyn was at the kitchen table with a ledger making notes. Cole stood in the doorway and looked at all of this. "Decker told me there was trouble this morning," he said. "There was," she said. "I handled it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "How's the hand?" "Clean cut. Won't need a doctor if he keeps it wrapped." She looked up. "He should probably stay off the wire fences. His hands are too unsteady." "He tells me he's fine." "His hands shake when he's nervous. Barbed wire is not a forgiving partner for shaking hands." She said it without judgment, just as information. "There's better work for him." Cole looked at her for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then he nodded. "I'll find him something else." That evening, after the men had eaten and the kitchen was quiet and Hattie was off her feet, Cole came to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her without asking if she wanted it. She took it. They sat on opposite sides of the table, and for a while neither of them said anything. Outside, the night sounds of the ranch went on, horses shifting, the creak of the bunkhouse door, somewhere a coyote discussing something urgent with the sky. "You did well today," Cole said. Not easily, the words had the quality of something he'd had to find before he could say it. "I made Moss feel foolish," she said. "I shouldn't have done it in front of Briggs." "Moss needed it. That's not the point." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "People work better when they're not ashamed. I'll remember that next time." Cole looked at her across the table. "You're harder on yourself than I'd be," he said. "I'm newer," she said. "I don't have the margin for error you do." He considered that. "You have more margin than you think." She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. "Thank you," she said, "for what you said about handling it." "It was true," he said, as if truth required no thanks. Which she was beginning to understand was exactly how Cole Barrett operated. 3 weeks in, he put a rifle in her hands, not dramatically. He simply appeared one morning after breakfast and said, "Today you're going to learn to shoot," and walked out expecting her to follow, and she followed. She had never held a rifle in her life. She didn't say this because he could see it in the way she held the thing at arm's length, like it might make a unilateral decision. "It won't fire by itself," he said. "I know that," she said. "Then hold it like you know it." She adjusted her grip. He corrected it hands-on, impersonal, the way you correct someone's grip on a hammer. He showed her the sighting line. He showed her the breath, the half-exhale, the stillness at the bottom of it, the pull. She missed the first 3 shots by a significant margin. "Again," he said. She hit the 4th. Not center, but hit. "Again," he said, and something in his voice had changed. Not warmer exactly, but invested the voice of someone who had spotted potential and decided to take it seriously. She hit 5 of the next 8. By the end of the morning, she was hitting 7 of 10, and her shoulder ached in a way she found unexpectedly satisfying. "Why does this matter?" she asked. They were walking back to the house. "Because this is Montana," Cole said. "Things go wrong out here. Predators, men worse than predators." He paused. A woman who can't defend herself is a liability. A woman who can defend herself is something else. What? He glanced at her sideways. An asset. She should not have found that as encouraging as she did. But she was beginning to understand that from Cole Barrett, asset was about as close to a compliment as the language stretched. She wrote to Ruth that night. "I'm married," she wrote, which sounds more alarming than it is. "His name is Cole Barrett, and he runs a ranch outside Millbrook. He is not a warm man. He is a fair one, which I am learning to appreciate more. I manage the household. 17 men eat here every day. I have learned to shoot a rifle. I have learned to read a weather pattern from how the horses stand in the south paddock. I have learned that Hattie takes her coffee with 3 sugars, and her dignity with 0 compromise, and I like her very much. I do not know what this becomes. But I am not hungry. I am not cold. I am not waiting in the back of a church counting minutes. For now, that is enough. For now, that is everything." She sealed the letter and set it by the door to go out with the Morning Post writer, and then she sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the late evening with the ranch sounds going on around her, and the ledger open in front of her, and a cup of Hattie's too strong coffee at her elbow. And she thought, I did not collapse on the side of that road. She had sat down. She had waited. And then help had come in the form of a man on a horse who asked if she was alive before he asked anything else. Sometimes survival looked exactly like that unglamorous, unromantic practical as a fence post. Sometimes you didn't get saved by a fairy tale. Sometimes you got offered a chair at a kitchen table and a rifle lesson and 3 weeks of honest work, and you took it because the alternative was sitting in the road waiting for the sky to clear. Evelyn Barrett picked up her pen and opened the accounts ledger, and she worked until the lamp oil ran low and the ranch breathed around her in the dark, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. She felt quietly and without ceremony, like she was home. The lamp oil ran out sometime after midnight, and Evelyn didn't notice until the kitchen went dark around her, and she realized she'd been working by memory for the last 10 minutes, running her finger down columns she could no longer see. She closed the ledger, sat in the dark for a moment, then went to bed. She slept 5 hours, which was, she had come to understand about what this ranch allowed, and was back at the kitchen table before Cole's boots hit the porch stairs at 4:45. By the time he came through the door, the coffee was made, and the morning supply list was drafted, and she had already identified a discrepancy in the previous week's grain usage that would save them a quarter order if she adjusted the rotation schedule. Cole stopped in the doorway and looked at her, then at the coffee, then at the ledger. "You were up late," he said. "The lamp ran out," she said. "I'll need more oil." He poured his coffee, sat down, read the supply list she slid across the table without being asked. His eyes moved down it fast, a man who'd been reading his own numbers for years and knew immediately when something was off. "You cut the grain order," he said, "by a quarter. If we shift Decker's crew to the South Paddock rotation Tuesday through Thursday, the horses come off heavy grazing and the feed demand drops. Same nutrition outcome, less cost." She paused. "I can show you the math." Cole looked at her across the table. "Show me the math," he said. She showed him the math. He followed it without interrupting, which she had learned meant he was taking it seriously. When she finished, he sat back and drank his coffee and was quiet for long enough that she started to wonder if she'd miscalculated something. "My father built this ranch," he said finally. He kept the books in his head. "Told me a real rancher didn't need paper for numbers he already knew." A pause. "He died with $1,800 of debt nobody knew about." Evelyn said nothing. "I've been running it on instinct for 15 years, Cole said. "Some years that's been enough." He set down the mug. "This year it hasn't." "I know," she said quietly. She'd seen the ledger. She'd seen what the last 2 seasons had cost. "Can you fix it?" he asked, directly without softening the question. She took her time answering because he deserved an honest answer and not a reassuring one. "I can make it better," she said. "I can't undo the last 2 years, but I can build a system that stops it from getting worse, and I can find places you've been losing money you don't know about." "How many places?" "So far." She opened to a marked page. 4. Cole leaned forward and looked at where her finger was pointing, and Evelyn watched something move through his face. Not embarrassment exactly, but the particular expression of a capable man confronting a category of problem he'd been ignoring because ignoring it felt less frightening than looking at it directly. "Teach me," he said. That was the second thing Cole Barrett said that she didn't expect. The first had been, "I can work with someone who doesn't beg." The second was, "Teach me 2 words that cost a man like him something real to say." She taught him. Right there at the kitchen table, before the men were up, before the day demanded anything from either of them. She showed him the column structures she'd built, the cross-references, the way she'd started tracking daily usage against weekly estimates, so they'd have 10 days warning before a shortage instead of 2. He asked good questions, sharp questions, the kind that told her he understood numbers fine, he'd just never had a framework to put them in. By the time Hattie appeared and started making noise about breakfast, they'd been at it for over an hour, and the kitchen had a different feeling than it had had the day before. Not warm, not yet, but leveled. Like 2 people who'd been working in the same building from different floors and had finally found the stairs between them. The morning Moss decided to test her was the morning she understood what the real work here was going to be. It wasn't the accounts. It wasn't the schedules or the supply orders or the rifle practice or learning to read weather in how the cattle moved before a storm. Those were tasks. Tasks had solutions. The real work was the 17 men who ate at this table and had opinions about who was setting it. Moss had been managing the kitchen stores since before Hattie's knees went bad, which meant he'd been managing them informally without documentation for about 2 years. He knew where everything was and nobody else did, which gave him a kind of power he'd grown comfortable with. When Evelyn reorganized the stores and documented everything in the new system, she'd inadvertently taken that power away from him, and he hadn't forgiven her for it, even though he hadn't said so directly. He said it indirectly instead, which was harder to address. He started questioning her decisions to the other men. Small things, not insubordination, nothing Cole could fairly address, but consistent small things. The wrong flour got ordered. He told Briggs she'd ordered it. She'd ordered the right flour. He'd recorded it wrong on the outgoing list. The sugar supply ran low faster than projected. He mentioned to Tommy that the new system wasn't accounting for proper usage. It was accounting fine. The usage had spiked because 3 extra men had joined the ranch for fall work, and nobody had told her to update the numbers. She found out about it from Decker, who told her with the diplomatic care of a man who wanted the problem fixed without being in the middle of it. "He's not a bad man," Decker said. "He just liked knowing things nobody else knew. You took that." "I didn't take anything that belonged to him," Evelyn said. "I know that. You know that." Decker looked at her with his map of the territory face. "Does it matter?" She thought about it. "No," she admitted. "Not to him." She went to Moss directly. Not in front of the others, she'd learned that lesson from week 1. She found him at the supply shed in the late afternoon when the other men were occupied, and she walked in and closed the door behind her, and she didn't ease into it. "You've been telling the men I'm making errors," she said. "You've been wrong each time, but that's not the point I want to make." Moss looked at her with the defensive expression of a man deciding whether to admit something or dig in. He dug in. "I've been pointing out things that needed pointing out." "No," she said. "You've been protecting territory that isn't yours anymore, and you've been doing it by making me look incompetent to the men who need to trust my decisions." She kept her voice even. Not cold, not heated level the way you hold a rifle before you fire. "I'm not asking you to like the new system. I'm telling you it's the system, and undermining it undermines this ranch. Not me, this ranch. These men's livelihoods." Moss was quiet. "I know you care about this place," she said, and she meant it. "That's why you're upset. If you didn't care, you wouldn't bother." She paused. "I need that from you, the caring. I need someone who knows every corner of this supply operation. But I need it working with me, not around me." Something shifted in Moss's face. A slow shift, like ground resettling after rain. "The flower system you built," he said finally. "The double stock rotation for winter. What about it? It won't work if the delivery comes in late, which it does most years, by 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks. She hadn't known that. Nobody had told her. What do you do when it comes in late? Split the current stock into thirds and ration the last third until the delivery arrives. He looked at her. "It's not in any ledger. It's just what you do." "Then we're going to put it in the ledger," she said. "And you're going to help me build that section because you know it better than I do." She held out her hand. "Deal." Moss looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and told her nothing except that he'd decided. "Deal," he said. He turned out to know the supply operation better than anyone on the ranch, and once he stopped spending energy on working against her, that knowledge became the most useful thing she had. The letter from Silverdale arrived on a Tuesday. It came with the post rider who did the weekly run between Millbrook and the eastern settlements, and it was addressed to Evelyn Cross in handwriting she recognized from a year of reading it on the boarding house register. It was from her former landlady, Mrs. Abel. Evelyn read it once, standing at the gate, then folded it and didn't read it again until that evening. The letter said that Damien Hale had returned from Denver, that he had been telling people in Silverdale that Evelyn had left the church herself, that she'd gotten cold feet run off, embarrassed his family. That several people believed him. That some people, Mrs. Abel wrote carefully, seemed to think he was the wronged party in this. Evelyn sat with the letter for a long time. She wasn't surprised. She recognized the move she'd watched Damien Hale operate in Silverdale for long enough to know he never accepted a cost without redirecting it. He'd left her standing in a church in front of witnesses, and now he was building a version of events where she had been the one who ran. What surprised her was the feeling underneath the anger. It was smaller than she expected, quieter. Like the anger was still there but no longer had anything to attach to, because she was sitting in a kitchen that was hers now, in a life she'd built from 32 minutes of waiting and 4 miles of road, and whatever Damien Hale was saying to whoever would listen in Silverdale had less purchase on her than it would have had 6 weeks ago. She was still angry, but the anger didn't have roots anymore. She told Cole that evening, not because she owed him the information, but because she'd promised no surprises, and this felt like the kind of information a man should have about his wife's history. Cole read the letter, read it again, set it on the table. "He's building a story," he said. "Yes." "Why does it matter to him you're gone? You're out of Silverdale. What does he gain?" "His family has a business in Silverdale," Evelyn said. "His father runs the mill. His uncle runs the freight operation. Their reputation matters to their trade." She paused. "A man who jilts a woman at the altar loses standing. A man whose nervous bride ran out on him is just unlucky." Cole's jaw moved once. Then he was still. "Has he tried to contact you?" he asked. "No." "If he does," Cole started. "I'll tell you," she said. "Immediately. No surprises." He looked at her. Something in his face that she was learning to read, not the words he said, but the territory underneath them, the place where Cole Barrett kept all the things he didn't say. Right now, that territory said, "I will handle this if it comes to that." What he actually said was, "Good." She folded the letter and put it away and didn't bring it out again. But she noticed that Cole started asking once a week if anything else had come from Silverdale. He asked quietly, as if it was a casual question. It wasn't. The first snow came early that year, which Decker said was a bad sign, and Perkins said was neither good nor bad, just Montana being Montana. The snow changed everything about the ranch's rhythm. The work compressed into shorter daylight windows. The cold pushed men indoors faster. In the evenings, the kitchen became less a place people passed through and more a place they gathered. Evelyn had not counted on the gathering. She had managed to establish her role with the men in the context of work supply decisions, schedules, Moss's reformed cooperation, Briggs's reassignment away from wire fencing. In the context of work, she had authority, or at least the functional equivalent of it. In the evenings in the kitchen with 17 ranch hands crowded around the big table because the bunkhouse was cold and the kitchen was warm. That was different territory. The stories started. Ranch hands told stories, long winding competitive stories about other ranches, other winters, other disasters. Evelyn listened. She'd learned early that listening was information, and information was the only real currency out here. She learned that Decker had come to Montana from Tennessee at the age of 22, running from a bad debt and a worse marriage that he referred to only as a situation. She learned that Briggs had wanted to be a school teacher and had failed the qualification exam twice and come west because there were no exams for fence work. She learned that Perkins had been on the Barrett Ranch for 21 years, longer than any other hand, longer than Cole's own tenure as owner, and that he had watched Margaret leave and the girl and had never once spoken of it to Cole because Cole had never opened the door. She filed all of this away, not for any particular purpose, just because she was the kind of person who thought that understanding where someone had been was essential to understanding what they needed from where they were. One evening, about 2 weeks into the snow and the gathering, Tommy asked her where she'd come from. The table went slightly quieter. Not silent, but the quality of the noise changed the way it changes when everyone is paying attention, but pretending not to. "Silverdale," she said. "What did you do there?" "Kept accounts for the general store. Mended clothes." She looked at Tommy, who was young enough to ask things directly and not yet old enough to be strategic about it. "Why? You just..." He struggled with the sentence. "You know a lot, about a lot of different things. I figured you must have done a lot of different things." "I paid attention," she said. "Mostly that." Across the table, she felt rather than saw Cole look up from his coffee. She didn't look at him. "My grandmother said that," Perkins said unexpectedly from the far end of the table. She said the difference between a smart person and a wise person was that a smart person paid attention when they expected to learn something, and a wise person paid attention all the time. The table considered this. "Your grandmother sounds like she was something," Evelyn said. "She absolutely was," Perkins said. "Terrified me for 30 years. Miss her every day." The table laughed, real laughter unforced, and something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, but Evelyn felt it, the slight repositioning that happens when a group of people decides collectively and without announcement that someone belongs. She didn't make a thing of it. She just passed the coffee around and let the stories continue, and she paid attention. It was Hattie who noticed first. Hattie noticed everything, but she was strategic about what she mentioned, and when, which was why Evelyn trusted her more than almost anyone else on the ranch. When Hattie spoke, it was because she'd calculated that speaking was worth more than staying quiet. She came to Evelyn on a Thursday morning while the men were out, and Cole was at the north fence line, and the kitchen was as close to private as it ever got. "He watches you," Hattie said. No preamble, no warm-up. Evelyn didn't stop what she was doing. "Pardon." "Cole." Hattie settled into her chair with the careful management of bad knees. "He watches you when you're not looking. Has been since about week 2. A pause. "And before you tell me it's a practical arrangement, I know what it is. I'm telling you what it's becoming." Evelyn set down the ledger. "Hattie, I'm not telling you to do anything about it," Hattie said. "I'm telling you so you have the information, because you're the kind of woman who does better with information than without it." She poured her own coffee with 3 sugars and the absolute authority of a woman who has earned her preferences. "He's not going to say anything. That man would sooner walk into a blizzard in his socks than tell someone how he feels. I've known him 6 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times he's said anything that could be called personal." "He told me about the ranch debt," Evelyn said. Hattie looked at her over the coffee mug. "Did he?" "First week. Sat down and told me the finances were worse than they looked and asked if I could fix them. Lord. Hattie set down the mug. That man told you about the debt in the first week. Is that significant, Evelyn? Hattie's voice had the quality of someone delivering news that should have been obvious. That man didn't tell me about the debt. Didn't tell Decker, who's been here 15 years. Didn't tell Perkins, who's been here 21. She shook her head slowly. He told you in the first week. Evelyn sat with that. I'm not saying it's love, Hattie said more gently. I'm saying it's trust. And for Cole Barrett, trust is rarer and harder to come by than love ever was. She patted Evelyn's hand once and stood up. That's all I'm saying. She went back to her kitchen work, and Evelyn went back to her ledger, and neither of them mentioned it again. But Evelyn started paying attention in a different direction, and Hattie, as usual, turned out to be right. The night the north fence broke was the night things changed. Not dramatically. Nothing with Cole Barrett happened dramatically. But the fence line had been compromised by the early snow's weight on a section that had already been weakened, and 3 cattle had gotten out into the lower pasture in the dark, and Cole had ridden out at 10 at night to find them before the temperature dropped further. He came back at 2 in the morning. Evelyn was still awake. She'd heard the horse and waited. She didn't ask why she waited. She just did. He came in cold to the bone, the kind of cold that doesn't leave fast. She put water on for coffee and didn't say anything, and he sat at the table and didn't say anything either, and the silence was different. Not the silence of 2 strangers in a practical arrangement. Something that had grown in the particular way of things that grow when nobody is looking directly at them. Got all 3, he said finally. Good, she said. Fence needs 2 days of work. Decker can start it tomorrow. I'll adjust the rotation. He nodded. She brought the coffee and sat down across from him, and they were quiet again. Outside, the snow had started again. She could hear it, the particular hush of it. Why are you still up? He asked. She considered lying or deflecting. She looked at him across the table, cold-tired, honest, in the way he was always honest without performance, and she said, I heard you ride out. I wanted to make sure you came back. Cole looked at her. The words sat in the space between them. She felt the weight of them and didn't take them back. After a long moment, he said, I always come back. I know, she said. I'm starting to count on it. He held her gaze for a beat, then looked at his coffee. But something around his mouth had changed. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. She went to bed an hour later. She didn't know what any of it meant exactly, but she knew what Hattie meant now about the difference between love and trust, and how for some people, the second was the road to the first. She fell asleep listening to the snow and thinking about how strange it was. How utterly strange that the worst morning of her life had led her here. To this kitchen. To this man. To a life that was hard and cold and full of work, and so much more real than anything she had imagined before it. She didn't call it love. Not yet. But she stopped calling it nothing. She stopped calling it nothing. But she didn't call it anything else yet either, because the ranch didn't give her time to sit with feelings and turn them over in her hands. The ranch gave her work, and work was what she had, and most mornings that was enough. The snow that had started the night Cole rode out for the cattle didn't stop for 4 days. By the end of it, the ranch was sealed in the particular way of Montana winters. Not dangerous, not yet, but total. The world outside the fence line ceased to exist in any practical sense. What existed was the kitchen, the bunkhouse, the barn, the men, the work, and Cole moving between all of it, with the steady, unhurried purpose of a man who had survived enough winters to stop being frightened by them. Evelyn used the sealed-in time to finish the winter supply documentation she'd been building with Moss. They worked at the kitchen table for 2 full afternoons, Moss talking, and Evelyn writing, building out the rationing protocols, and the late delivery contingencies, and the 3-year usage patterns Moss held entirely in his head and had never put on paper. When they finished, Moss looked at the completed document with an expression she recognized, the particular pride of someone who has always known they knew something important and has now seen that knowledge confirmed by the act of it being written down. "That's it," he said. "That's everything." "Almost," she said. "Tell me about the spring thaw orders. You mentioned the mud makes the northern road impassable." Moss told her about the spring thaw. She wrote it down. Outside, the snow continued its conversation with the fence posts, and inside, something that had been adversarial became quietly, and without announcement, collaborative. It was Perkins who interrupted them, appearing in the kitchen doorway, with an expression that Evelyn had learned to read as controlled urgency, not panic, because Perkins didn't panic, but the compressed alertness of a man delivering news he doesn't like. "Rider at the gate," he said. "From Silverdale." The kitchen went still. Evelyn set down her pen. "Who?" Cole said. He'd been at the far end of the table going over the fence repair costs, and he looked up without moving anything else. "Didn't give a name. Young man. Says he has a letter for Evelyn Barrett." Perkins paused. "Says he was told to deliver it personal." Cole looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, but the space between them had the particular charge of two people thinking the same thing. "Bring him in," Cole said. The rider was young, barely 20, half frozen, and trying very hard to look like he wasn't intimidated by the size of the man who'd opened the gate or the size of the ranch behind him. He handed Evelyn the letter and said he'd been paid to deliver it and didn't know what was in it, which was either true or the wisest thing he could have said, and then Cole told Decker to feed him and warm him up before sending him back. Evelyn opened the letter at the kitchen table with Cole across from her, and Moss and Perkins, both finding reasons to be in the adjacent hallway. The letter was from Damien Hale. Not Mrs. Abel this time. Damien himself, in the controlled, elegant handwriting he'd cultivated specifically because he knew it impressed people. He wrote that he'd heard she'd gotten herself situated, which he called an admirable act of resourcefulness. He wrote that he bore her no ill will. He wrote that he hoped her new arrangement was treating her well. And then, after 3 paragraphs of what could charitably be called pleasantries and less charitably called positioning, he arrived at the point. He wrote that his father had acquired a debt instrument against a parcel of land adjacent to Barrett Ranch's northern boundary. He wrote that the debt was currently in default. He wrote that the Hale family had not yet decided what to do with the instrument, that there were several options, and that he thought, as someone who had once cared for Evelyn and wished her well in her new life, that she deserved to know this information before any decisions were made. He signed it. "With continued regard, Damien." Evelyn read it twice. Then she set it flat on the table and pushed it across to Cole. Cole read it. His face didn't change, which was how she knew it was bad. "What's the northern parcel?" she asked. "Water rights," Cole said. He set the letter down. "There's a creek that feeds our north pasture. The land around it belongs to old Harlan Pete. Has for 30 years. A pause. "Harlan's been sick. His son moved to Oregon 2 years ago. If Harlan defaulted on something..." Cole stopped. "If the Hale family holds that instrument," Evelyn said, "they control the water access. They'd control more than that." Cole's voice was flat and careful. "Without that creek, the north pasture is unusable in summer. We lose the north pasture, we cut cattle capacity by 1/3. He picked up the letter again. Read the last paragraph. "He's not telling you out of consideration. He's telling you so you'll do something." "He wants me to come back to Silverdale," Evelyn said, "or negotiate, or ask you to negotiate. He wants a conversation that puts him in a position." Cole looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. "Is that what you think?" "I know how he operates." She took the letter back. "He doesn't do anything without a position. He didn't ride out here himself because that would show his hand. He sent a letter that sounds generous and isn't." She folded it once precisely. "He wants us to come to him, which is the one thing we shouldn't do." "Agreed," Cole said. "We need to find out if Harlan Pete's debt is real and what the actual terms are," Evelyn said. "If we know the instrument, we know what options they actually have." "How do you know that?" "I spent 2 years in a general store," she said. A general store in a small town is basically a clearinghouse for everyone's financial problems. You hear things. She paused. And I kept accounts. Debt instruments have structure. If we know the structure, we know how much time we have and what they can and can't do with it. Cole was quiet for a moment. I need to ride to Millbrook. There's a man there, Aldous Cross, he does land recording. My father's cousin, Evelyn said. Cole stopped. I didn't know he was in Millbrook, she said. We lost contact years ago. She said it with complete steadiness, because it was just a fact, just another fact in a life that had been full of complicated facts. But if he does land recording, he'll know about the Pete parcel, and he'll talk to me. Cole studied her for a moment. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. I'm telling you I will. She stood. How soon can you ride? Tomorrow morning if the road's clear. I'll be ready at 5. Aldous Cross was a small, careful man in his 60s who wore his precision on his face the way other men wore their history. He received Evelyn in his land office in Millbrook with the controlled surprise of someone who had heard she existed but not expected to see her. And he shook her hand with both of his and said she looked like her mother, which was the first time anyone had said that to her in 3 years, and hit her somewhere unexpected. She introduced Cole. Aldous looked at Cole the way men of a certain age look at the men their female relatives have attached themselves to, with assessment layered over courtesy. Cole bore the assessment without reaction, which Evelyn suspected was the right response. Harlan Pete, Evelyn said once they were seated. No warm-up. Aldous, she sensed, was a man who appreciated directness. Aldous folded his hands. What do you know already? Enough to be here, she said. He told them the rest. Harlan Pete had borrowed against the northern parcel 18 months ago to cover medical expenses, which had been considerable. The debt holder was a Silverdale lending concern, not the Hale family directly, but a firm that the Hale family had significant financial relationships with. The debt had gone into technical default 6 weeks ago when Harlan missed his third payment. The lending concern had not yet moved to enforce, which was interesting, Aldous said, because they usually moved within 30 days. Why haven't they moved? Cole asked. Aldous looked at him. That's the right question. He paused. The Hale family reached out to this office 2 weeks ago, inquiring about the parcel's water rights documentation. Another pause. I told them what I tell everyone, public record, they're welcome to it. Evelyn looked at Cole. Cole looked at Evelyn. They've been planning this for at least 2 weeks, Cole said. Longer than that, Evelyn said. Damien left for Denver before our wedding. He was gone for weeks. He came back and immediately started rebuilding his story in Silverdale. She thought through it out loud the way she tracked account discrepancies, looking for where the numbers stopped adding up. He didn't come back because he changed his mind about anything. He came back because he had a plan. What plan? Cole asked. I don't know yet, but it's not about the water rights. She looked at Aldous. What else is adjacent to the Pete parcel? Aldous pulled out a map. He spread it on the desk and ran his finger along the northern boundary, and Evelyn leaned over and looked, and Cole leaned over beside her, and for a moment the three of them were very still together, looking at the same information and reaching the same conclusion from different directions. The Pete parcel isn't just water rights, Cole said, quietly, the way he said things when they were serious. If you control that parcel, you control the only viable road access to the North Range. And if you control road access to the North Range, Evelyn said, you can charge passage, or deny it. Or make it so expensive that operating the North Range becomes unprofitable, Cole said. Aldous looked between them. I see you've both gotten there. This isn't about water, Evelyn said. This is about making the ranch unworkable from the north until Cole sells or concedes something. She straightened. What would he want to buy? The Hale family has a freight operation. What's in the North Range that they'd want access to? Timber, Cole said immediately. 300 acres of standing timber on the ridge above the north pasture. I've never logged it because I don't need to and because it protects the watershed. He paused. A freight operation with logging contracts would want that timber badly. And they can't get to it without going through Barrett land, Evelyn said, unless they control the peat parcel. The three of them sat with that for a moment. How long before the lending concern has to move on the default? Cole asked Aldous. Legally, they can wait up to 90 days from the default date before the instrument lapses back to negotiation. Aldous paused. You have approximately 50 days. Can Harlan Pete sell the parcel himself before the default is enforced? Evelyn asked. Aldous looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating his estimate of someone. He can. If he finds a buyer and settles the debt simultaneously, the lending concern loses their enforcement claim. A pause. But Harlan's bedridden. He's not in a position to negotiate. His son in Oregon, Cole said. Does he have legal authority? He would need a documented authorization from Harlan. Then we need to talk to Harlan, Evelyn said. She looked at Cole. Before the Hale family does. Cole looked back at her. His face had the focused, stripped-down quality it had when he was working through a serious problem and had reached the point where thinking stopped and deciding started. Harlan's ranch is 12 miles northeast. Roads rough after the snow. Can we make it today? If we leave now. She stood. Then let's leave now. Harlan Pete was a man who had been eaten by illness. The way a fire eats a building slowly from the inside, leaving the structure standing longer than seemed possible. He received them from a bed in the front room of his ranch house, managed by a neighbor woman named Clara, who had been coming in 3 days a week since Harlan's condition worsened, and he looked at Cole with the recognition of a man who'd known him for years, and at Evelyn with the curiosity of a man who still paid attention even when his body had largely stopped cooperating. Cole Barrett, Harlan said. His voice was rough but present. Heard you got married. I did, Cole said. This is Evelyn. Harlan looked at Evelyn for a moment. You're the one who fixed his books, he said. She glanced at Cole, who had the very slight expression of a man who hadn't known his accounting situation had become local knowledge. Word travels, she said. Always does out here. Harlan coughed, got through it. You're here about the parcel. Yes, Cole said. How did you know? Because someone else was already here, Harlan said. 2 days ago, man from Silverdale, said the lending concern was ready to enforce and that he represented a buyer who could settle the debt and give me a fair price on top. He paused. Said I should sign before the window closed. Evelyn's chest tightened. Did you sign? No, Harlan said. I told him I needed to think. He looked at Cole steadily. I've known your family for 30 years, Cole. Your father let me run cattle on his south pasture the winter of '81 when my herd would have starved otherwise. He never asked for anything back. A long breath. I wasn't going to sign papers with a stranger before I at least talked to you. Cole was quiet for a moment. I need to buy the parcel, Harlan. The debt and the land. I can get you fair price. Cole, Evelyn started. I know the finances, he said. To her not dismissively the way he said things, when he'd already run the numbers and made the decision. I know what we have. We can do it. Harlan looked between them. How fast? How long can you hold off the Silverdale man? Evelyn asked. I told him I'd have an answer in a week, Harlan said. He wasn't happy, but he left. A pause. He'll be back. 5 days, Cole said. I need 5 days to get the funds arranged and the paperwork through Aldous. Harlan extended his hand. His grip was weaker than it used to be, but his eyes were clear. 5 days, he said. And Cole, whatever you pay for that land, you keep the water rights open for any ranch that needs them. That's my condition. Done, Cole said. They rode back in this cold, with the early dark coming down around them, and Evelyn turned the whole shape of it over in her mind, the Hale family's calculation, the 50-day window, the man who'd been at Harlan's 2 days ago, the 5 days they now had. Who was the man they sent? She said. They'd been riding for 20 minutes in silence, and she hadn't been able to hold the question any longer. Don't know yet, Cole said. But if they've been moving for weeks, they're organized. This isn't a spontaneous decision. Damien's letter was a distraction, she said. He sent it to make us think the threat was coming through negotiation. Through me. While they were already moving on Harlan directly. Cole glanced at her sideways. You think he knew you'd figure it out? No, she said. I think he counted on me being distracted by the personal element. He always assumed people's emotions were their weakest points. She paused. He was right about most people. Cole was quiet for a beat. He was wrong about you. She didn't respond to that immediately. The horses moved through the cold and the narrowing light, and the ranch was still an hour ahead of them, and she thought about Damien Hale writing a letter designed to rattle her and sending it through a half-frozen young rider. And she thought about sitting across from Harlan Pete and watching Cole Barrett shake a dying man's hand with the absolute certainty of someone who keeps his word. He was always wrong about me, she said. He just didn't know it. They rode the rest of the way without talking, which was not uncomfortable. Evelyn had learned by now that silence with Cole was its own kind of language, not absence, but presence without performance. She had grown up in a house where silence meant trouble and noise meant safety, and she'd spent years filling space with words to ward off the quiet. She was learning slowly that some silences were the opposite of trouble. Some silences were the only honest thing. Back at the ranch, Cole called Decker and Perkins into the kitchen after dinner. He told them what they'd found. He told them what he planned to do. He told them what the Hale family was likely planning and what it would mean for the ranch if they succeeded. Decker listened without interrupting, which was how Decker handled serious news. Perkins listened with his eyes half closed, which was how Perkins handled everything, and which Evelyn had come to understand meant he was thinking faster than most people talked. They'll move on Harlan again before your 5 days are up, Perkins said when Cole finished. They know Harlan's wavering. They'll send someone with a bigger number or a harder push. I'll have Aldous draw the papers tomorrow, Cole said. We ride to Harlan the day after with the funds. And if they're already there, Decker asked. Then we deal with that, Cole said. Cole? Evelyn spoke from the end of the table, and the room turned to her in the way it did now, not automatically, not from authority, but from the accumulated weight of her having been right often enough. We need to know who the Hale family sent to Harlan. If it's someone local, they have contacts here. That changes what we're dealing with. How do we find out? Decker asked. Clara, Evelyn said. The neighbor woman who tends Harlan. She saw the man. She'd describe him. You think she will? Cole asked. I think she's been watching over a sick old man, and someone came and tried to push him into signing papers while he was bedridden. Evelyn looked at him steadily. I think she'll tell us everything she remembers. Cole held her gaze for a moment. Ride out to Clara tomorrow morning, he said. Take Decker. I'll go alone, she said. Cole opened his mouth. Decker makes people careful, she said. Clara will talk more freely to another woman. She paused. Let me do this. The room was quiet. Cole closed his mouth, looked at her for a beat. Be back before noon. I'll be back by 10, she said. Doug. Clara described the man in the kind of precise, practical detail that women who pay attention always carry medium height, well-dressed for the frontier, a scar along the left jawline and boots that were too new and too clean for someone who'd ridden 12 miles on rough road. He wasn't a ranchman, Clara said. He had a ranchman's clothes, but not a ranchman's hands, and he talked like he'd rehearsed what he was going to say. She looked at Evelyn, like a salesman or a lawyer. Did he leave anything a card? A letter? Clara hesitated. Then she went to the kitchen shelf and took down a folded paper that had been sitting behind a tin of salt. He left this for Harlan. Said it was the formal offer. Harlan didn't want to look at it, so I put it away. Evelyn opened it. It was a purchase agreement. The debt settlement amount, the land price, the transfer terms, all written in proper legal language, cleanly formatted with a signature line at the bottom. And at the top, the name of the purchasing entity. Not the Hale family. Not the lending concern. A company name she didn't recognize, Territorial Land and Timber Associates. She folded the paper and looked at Clara. Can I take this? Harlan said to give it to Cole Barrett if he came asking. Clara said. He said he figured Cole would come. Evelyn rode back to the ranch with the paper in her coat pocket, and her mind running the new name through every frame she had. A company. A formal company, not a family buying property, which meant the Hale family had structured this through an intermediary, which meant this was not an opportunistic move, but a long-planned one. Which meant they'd been watching Barrett Ranch for longer than Damien's letter suggested. She got back at 9:45. Cole was in the yard when she rode in. She dismounted and handed him the paper and watched his face as he read it. He read it twice, his jaw set. "Territorial Land and Timber Associates," he said. "Do you know it?" "No, but I know who will." He looked up. Aldous Cross records every company that files a land claim in this territory. If this company has made any other moves, they've been building, Evelyn said. This isn't their first parcel, it can't be. She held his eyes. Cole, this is bigger than Harlan Pete's debt. The silence that followed had weight, real weight, the kind you feel in your chest. How much bigger? He said. I don't know yet, she said. But I think the Hale family isn't just after your timber. I think they're building something that requires controlling the land around multiple ranches. She paused. And I think they chose Barrett Ranch to move on first because of me. Because they thought I was leverage. Cole looked at her. Something in his face had gone very still. They were wrong, he said. Yes, she said. They were. He handed the paper back to her. We ride to Aldous tomorrow, both of us. He turned toward the barn, then stopped, turned back. Evelyn. She waited. You did well today, he said. The same words he'd used after the crisis with Briggs and Moss weeks ago. But the way he said them was different. Not the assessment of someone evaluating a useful employee. Something else. Something that didn't have a clean name yet. Thank you, she said. He nodded, went to the barn. She stood in the yard for a moment in the cold, the paper in her hand, and the weight of what was coming settling into her bones, and she thought Damien Hale made one critical error. He thought coming back into her life meant she was still the woman who'd waited 32 minutes in a church. She wasn't that woman anymore. She wasn't sure actually that woman had ever been who Damien thought she was. She'd just never had the circumstances to prove it, until a rainstorm and a man on a horse and a kitchen table with a cup of coffee had given her the room to find out. She put the paper in her coat, went inside, got back to work. Aldous Cross spread 7 documents across his desk and didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at them the way a man looks at a pattern he's been seeing form for weeks and has finally found the last piece of. Territorial Land and Timber Associates, he said. I've been watching this name for 3 months. Cole leaned forward. How many parcels? 4 recorded claims in this territory. 2 settled, 1 pending. And now Harlan Pete's. Aldous picked up the purchase agreement Evelyn had brought from Clara and set it beside his own documents. They're moving in a line, northeast to southwest along the ridge corridor above the Millbrook Valley. Evelyn looked at the documents. She didn't need a map. She'd been looking at the ledger of Barrett Ranch long enough to know its geography and numbers, which pastures cost what to run, which routes the supply riders used, which parcels sat adjacent to what. She tracked the line Aldous described in her head and landed on the same point from a different direction. The ridge corridor is the only viable logging road into the high timber, she said. If you control those 4 parcels, you control the entire route from Silverdale to the ridge. And every ranch that currently uses that corridor for summer grazing pays you to cross it, Cole said. His voice had the flat quality it got when he was angry and containing it. Or you shut them off the high pasture entirely. 3 ranches besides Barrett depend on that corridor, Aldous said. The Lundgren spread, the McCabe brothers, old Whitfield's place. Do they know? Evelyn asked. No, Aldous said. The claims were filed under the company name. Nobody connected them. He paused. I only connected them because land recording is what I do and I look at everything. Cole was quiet for a moment, doing what he did, stripping a problem down to its essential structure. If we buy Harlan's parcel, we break the line. They can't complete the corridor without it. Which is exactly why they're moving fast, Evelyn said. They know if the ranches along that corridor compare notes, the plan falls apart. She looked at Cole. We need to talk to Lundgren and the McCabe's today. Cole looked at her. Today? If we wait, the Hale family sends someone else to Harlan, or they find another approach. She held his eyes. The only thing that stops this is the ranches standing together. Today. Cole stood. Aldous, can you have the Pete purchase documents ready by tomorrow morning? If I start now, Aldous said. Start now. Cole put his hat on. We'll be back at first light. The McCabe brothers, Finn and Roy, ran their spread 10 miles west of Barrett and had the particular wariness of men who'd survived enough bad deals to be suspicious of anyone arriving unannounced. They met Cole and Evelyn at the gate, which was their right, and listened to everything Cole laid out with faces that gave away nothing. When Cole finished, Finn McCabe looked at his brother. Roy McCabe looked at the ground. Some conversation happened between them in that look that Evelyn couldn't read. Who's the woman? Finn said. Not rudely, just directly. The frontier directness that asked what it meant to ask. My wife, Cole said. She found the purchase agreement. She connected the parcels. Finn looked at Evelyn for a long moment. How? I grew up reading accounts, she said. A ledger is a ledger, whether it's flour costs or land claims. You look for what doesn't add up. She paused. 4 land claims filed by the same company in a 6-month window along the same geographic line doesn't add up. Not unless someone's building something they don't want you to see until it's finished. Roy McCabe spoke for the first time. Our north summer pasture goes through that corridor. I know, Evelyn said. So does Lundgren's, so does Whitfield's. If they close it, you lose the north pasture, she said, or you pay to cross. Either way, your operating margin shrinks until it's not worth running. Roy looked at his brother again. This time the look was different. What do you need from us? Finn said. Ride to Aldous Cross in Millbrook, Cole said. Have him document your corridor usage, historical continuous going back as far as you have records. If this goes to a territorial judge, established usage rights are the strongest argument we have. And the Hale family? Roy asked. They're behind this company. We believe so, Cole said. We don't have documentation yet that directly connects them. We will, Evelyn said. Both brothers looked at her. The man who visited Harlan Pete had clean boots and rehearsed language, she said. That's not a ranchman. That's hired legal representation. Legal representation leaves paper trails. She looked at Cole. When we go back to Aldous, we pull the company's filing documents. Every registered company lists its principals. Cole held her gaze for a beat. Then he looked at the McCabes. You in? Finn put his hand out. We're in. Lundgren was easier. He was a Swedish-born rancher in his 50s who had built his spread from nothing over 20 years and had a Swede's particular combination of stubbornness and practicality that made him both the best and most immovable kind of ally. When Cole and Evelyn arrived and explained, Lundgren said 3 words. Show me the paper. Evelyn showed him the purchase agreement. He read it with the focused attention of a man who read slowly but understood completely. Then he said, What do we do? Whitfield's place was harder. Whitfield himself was nearly 70, sharp-minded but physically limited, and his grown son Gerald ran the operation day to day with the defensive suspicion of a man who believed most offers of help were the beginning of being taken advantage of. Gerald Whitfield listened to everything Cole said and then asked, What do you get out of this? The same thing you do, Cole said. The corridor stays open. Barrett Ranch isn't as dependent on the corridor as our place. Not yet, Cole said. But if Territorial Land and Timber closes the Pete parcel, the next move is the Callaway Creek watershed, which is adjacent to my north pasture. He paused. We all lose this, or none of us do. Gerald chewed on that. I'll talk to my father. Tonight, Evelyn said. We need an answer tonight. Gerald looked at her sharply. "You're in a hurry. We have 4 days before the Hale family moves on Harlan Pete again," she said. "Yes, I'm in a hurry." She met his eyes with the particular steadiness she'd developed over weeks of managing 17 men who occasionally needed to be told something clearly. "I'm not asking you to trust us. I'm asking you to look at the same information we looked at and reach the same conclusion we reached." A pause. "Can you do that by tonight?" Gerald held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked at Cole. "She always like this?" "Yes," Cole said, and something in his voice beneath the word said, "And thank God for it." They rode back to Barrett Ranch in the late afternoon with commitments from 2 of 3 neighbors, and a conditional from the third, and the purchase agreement in Evelyn's coat, and the company filing question still unanswered. That question got answered at 7 that evening, when a letter arrived from Aldous Cross, sent ahead by the Millbrook Post writer who covered the evening circuit. Aldous had pulled the company's territorial filing. The registered principals of Territorial Land and Timber Associates were 3 names: a territorial lawyer named Holt, a Denver investment concern, and Reginald Hale Damien's father, the man who ran the Silverdale mill and freight operation. Evelyn read the letter at the kitchen table with Cole across from her and Decker and Perkins in the room, because there was no point pretending this was private anymore. She read it once, set it flat, and said, "It's Reginald, not Damien." Cole took the letter. "Read it." "Damien's the face," Evelyn said. "He wrote the letter to me. He sent the writer. He's the one people see." She thought through it out loud. "But Reginald built the company. Reginald filed the claims. This has been Reginald's operation from the beginning." "Why use Damien at all?" Decker asked. "Because Damien knows me," Evelyn said. "Reginald calculated that having Damien contact me would create confusion, emotion, the kind of distraction that slows decision-making." She paused. "He almost got it right. He just didn't calculate that I'd tell Cole everything immediately." "And that you'd go straight at the problem instead of the feeling," Perkins said from his end of the table, quietly. Not a compliment exactly, more like a notation, an accurate one. Cole set the letter down. "Reginald Hale is in Silverdale." "Yes?" "He has a lawyer in Millbrook and connections to a Denver investment group." Cole was building it out the way he built fence lines, piece by piece, testing each joint before adding the next. "This isn't a local play. The Denver money makes this territorial, which means a territorial judge is going to matter more than a county one, which is why Aldous needs to document everything we have before we make any formal move," Evelyn said. "If we go at Reginald Hale with incomplete documentation, he buries us in legal delays until the window closes and they get Harlan's parcel regardless." "How complete do we need to be?" Cole asked. "Complete enough that a territorial judge looks at it and sees the scheme whole," she said. "The 4 parcel claims, the corridor, the Hale family connection through the company, the established usage rights from all 4 ranches." She paused. "And Harlan's purchase. That's the linchpin. If you own Harlan's parcel, the corridor is broken and the whole scheme is worth significantly less." "Funds are arranged," Cole said. "Aldous has the papers ready at first light. Then we go to Harlan at first light," she said. "Before anyone else does." The room was quiet for a moment. Decker looked at Cole. Cole looked at the table. Perkins looked at nothing in particular, which was his version of looking at everything. "There's something else," Perkins said. Everyone looked at him. If Reginald Hale is serious about this, and a company filing, and a Denver investment group says he's serious, he's not going to let Harlan's parcel go without a fight. Perkins paused. "The man they sent to Harlan left when Harlan said he needed a week. He knew Harlan was wavering. He'll go back with something bigger." "How much bigger?" Cole asked. "Bigger than you can match financially," Perkins said. "They've got Denver money. You don't." He looked at Cole levelly. "This doesn't stay a paper fight, Cole. It hasn't been just a paper fight since they started building a company and filing claims. This is a land grab with money and lawyers behind it." A pause. "Men like Reginald Hale, when the paper stops working, They moved to the next thing. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. "You think they'll send someone to stop us reaching Harlan?" Cole said. "I think they've been watching this ranch," Perkins said. "I think they knew about the rider they sent from Silverdale the day before he arrived. I think someone has been watching the road between here and Millbrook." He looked at Evelyn. "And I think when you rode out to Clara's yesterday and came back with that purchase agreement, someone saw you." Evelyn went very still. Cole's jaw set. He looked at Perkins for a long moment. Then he looked at Decker. Something passed between them, the communication of men who'd worked side by side long enough to have a shorthand. "Double the night watch," Cole said. "Tonight and tomorrow." "Already thinking it," Decker said, and stood. "Perkins." Cole kept his voice level. "What do you know that you haven't said yet?" Perkins was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, deciding. "The man who came to Harlan. Clean boots, scar on the jaw. I've seen that description before." He looked at Cole steadily. "Holt. The lawyer registered in the company filing. He's been in this territory before. I saw him in Millbrook 4 years back when there was a land dispute east of here. He works for people who want things done without obvious fingerprints. And when the polite approach doesn't work..." Perkins stopped. "He has other approaches," Cole said. "Yes." Cole absorbed that, sat with it, then stood. "Evelyn." She looked at him. "You ride with me tomorrow. Not ahead of me. Not alone." He held her eyes with an expression that was not a request. Agreed. She'd learned enough about Cole Barrett to know that this was not control. It was the specific concern of a man who had calculated a risk and made a decision and was asking her to accept the decision without making him explain all of it. She also knew enough about herself to know that she would have pushed back 4 weeks ago, that she would have said she could manage herself. She still could manage herself. That hadn't changed. But she was beginning to understand that letting someone ride beside you wasn't the same as being managed. That accepting protection from someone who valued you was different from accepting it from someone who doubted you. "Agreed," she said. Something in Cole's face shifted, that small, barely there shift she'd learned to watch for the one that was his version of relief. "Get some sleep," he said. "Both of you." He looked at Perkins last. "All of you." She didn't sleep much. She lay in the dark and thought about the shape of what was coming. The way she thought about supply problems, not with dread, but with the methodical attention of someone who needed to see all the angles before morning. She thought about Reginald Hale building a company in the dark over months, filing claims quietly, using his son as a distraction while he moved pieces into position. She thought about the kind of mind that did that, patient, strategic, willing to wait as long as the outcome was secured. She thought about herself 6 weeks ago, sitting in the mud at the side of a road with $6.40 and a ruined wedding dress. She thought about how Damien had never once treated her like someone who could think 3 steps ahead. He had treated her the way you treat furniture, present useful, expected to stay where you put it. And his father had made the same calculation because Damien's assessments of people were the data Reginald used, and Damien had assessed Evelyn Cross as manageable. The mistake wasn't tactical. It was fundamental. She got up at 4, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the dark and went through everything they knew one more time, laying it out in her mind like columns in a ledger, looking for what didn't balance. Cole came down at 4:30 and stopped in the doorway when he saw her. "You couldn't sleep either," she said. "No." He poured coffee, sat across from her. The ranch was dark and quiet around them. "I've been thinking about Holt," she said. "So have I. If he moves before we reach Harlan..." "We'll deal with it," Cole said. "How?" He looked at her across the table. "Together," he said. Like it was simple. Like it had always been simple. She looked at him in the lamplight, this man who had offered her a chair and a deal and a rifle and the space to become something she hadn't known she was, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not a surprise exactly, more like recognition. The feeling of arriving somewhere you'd been moving toward without quite knowing it. "Cole," she said. He waited. "I need you to know..." She stopped. Found the words. This started as survival, for both of us. You needed someone to run the house. I needed a roof. She paused. It's not that anymore. Not for me. Cole held her gaze. The silence stretched long enough that she started to wonder if she'd misjudged, if Hattie had been seeing what she wanted to see, if the things she thought she'd noticed were reflections of her own mind. Then Cole said, "It hasn't been that for me either. For a while now." She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "I'm not good at saying things," he said, directly without apology. "I've never been good at it. Margaret used to say—" He stopped. "That's not what I want to talk about." "Then don't," she said, gently. "I notice things," he said, instead of saying them. "I noticed when you fixed the ledger and didn't make a thing of it. I noticed how you handled Moss without humiliating him. I noticed when you came back from Clara's with that paper, and you were already 3 steps ahead of where I was." He paused. "I noticed that you waited up when I rode out for the cattle. I told you why," she said. "I know." Something around his eyes. Not quite a smile, but warm. The particular warmth of someone who has been cold for a long time and is choosing carefully to move toward heat. "I'm glad you told me." She reached across the table. Not dramatically, just set her hand flat on the table between them, not quite touching his. An offering without demand. Cole looked at her hand. Then he put his over it. His hand was rough and large and very certain. They sat like that in the quiet of the dark kitchen while the ranch slept around them, and neither of them said anything else, and nothing needed to be said. They rode out at 5:15 with Decker and 2 of the steadiest hands, and they took the less traveled route to Harlan's, because Perkins had said someone was watching the main road, and Evelyn had agreed with Perkins's instinct without being able to prove it. And Cole had decided that being wrong about the less traveled route cost them 40 minutes, and being wrong about the main road cost them everything. The decision turned out to be right. They found out it was right when Decker, riding 50 yards ahead, pulled up suddenly and held up his fist, and the group stopped in the kind of silence that happens when everyone understands at once that the situation has changed. Decker rode back. His face was controlled in the particular way of a man controlling it deliberately. "2 riders on the main road heading toward Harlan's," he said quietly. "Moving fast." Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Cole. "Holt," she said. "Has to be," Cole said. He looked at Decker. "Can we cut ahead of them through the north draw?" "If we move now," Decker said. "It's rough and fast." Cole looked at his horse, looked at the 2 hands, looked at Evelyn. "Can you ride hard?" he asked her, not doubting, just asking because the answer mattered. "You've seen me ride," she said. "Hard?" he said. "I mean hard." "Go," she said. They went. The North Draw was not a route anyone used in winter without reason, which meant it was rough and uneven and demanded complete attention. Evelyn rode with the focused physical certainty of someone who'd been practicing since October, because Cole had made her practice, and who understood now in her body, rather than just her mind, that a horse was not a vehicle, but a partnership, and that the partnership worked best when you committed completely and second-guessed nothing. She committed completely. She second-guessed nothing. They came out ahead of the 2 riders by 7 minutes. Enough. They were inside Harlan Pete's front room, with Clara watching wide-eyed from the kitchen doorway, and Harlan propped up on his pillows looking alert despite everything when they heard the riders pull up outside. Cole laid the purchase documents on Harlan's bed. "Sign now," he said, "before they come in." Harlan looked at the documents. He looked at Cole. He looked at Evelyn. "This is right," he said, to Evelyn, not Cole. She understood why he'd known Cole's family for 30 years, but trust was trust, and he wanted confirmation from the person he'd seen think. "It's right," she said. "The price is fair. The water rights clause is in there. You're protecting your land from being used against your neighbors, which is what you wanted." Harlan picked up the pen. His hand shook slightly. He signed. Cole witnessed. Evelyn witnessed. Clara witnessed from the doorway. The knock came at the front door 30 seconds later. Cole handed the signed documents to Evelyn. "Put these inside your coat," he said quietly. "Don't take them out for any reason." She tucked them against her chest, buttoned her coat, stood. Cole opened the door. The man on the porch was medium height, well-dressed, and had a scar along his left jawline that Evelyn recognized from Clara's description without needing to be told. He looked at Cole with the measured assessment of someone who had calculated this encounter in advance and was now adjusting for the unexpected variable of Cole being here at all. Behind him, the second rider held 2 horses and said nothing. "Mr. Barrett," Holt said. He had a lawyer's voice controlled, modulated, designed to sound reasonable while communicating something else entirely. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," Cole said. "I'm here to see Mr. Pete about a business matter." "Mr. Pete's business is concluded," Cole said. "He's not available." Holt's eyes moved past Cole into the room. They found Evelyn. They stayed on her for a moment with the specific attention of someone filing information. "Mrs. Barrett," he said. "I've heard of you." "I'd imagine," she said. "Mr. Hale sends his regards." "Which one?" she said. A small pause, then both. Then, "Tell Reginald Hale," she said, and her voice was very steady, very clear, "that Harlan Pete's parcel transferred this morning at fair price with documented water rights provisions. Tell him the corridor is broken, and tell him that the 4 ranches along that corridor have documented their established usage rights with the Territorial Land Recorder." She paused. "If Territorial Land and Timber Associates wants to pursue the remaining parcels, they're welcome to. But the scheme they built requires all 4, and they don't have the linchpin anymore." Holt looked at her for a long moment, the lawyer's face doing its controlled calculating work. "You've been busy," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have." He looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him with the absolute, unmoving stillness of a man who has made his decisions and is not interested in revisiting them. Holt put his hat back on. "Good day, Mr. Barrett." A pause. "Mrs. Barrett?" He walked back to his horse. They rode away. Cole closed the door. The room was very quiet. Harlan's breathing. Clara's held exhale finally releasing Decker's shifting weight near the window. Evelyn standing with the signed documents inside her coat, pressed warm against her sternum. "That's it," Clara said. From the kitchen doorway sounding like she'd expected something larger. "That's it," Evelyn said. "For now." Cole turned from the door. He looked at Evelyn with an expression she'd learned to read past the surface into the territory underneath where Cole Barrett kept the things that were real. What she saw there was not relief exactly, not satisfaction. Something deeper and quieter and more durable than either. "For now," he said, "but they'll regroup." "I know," she said. "Reginald Hale doesn't lose cleanly." "No," she said. "He doesn't." She met his eyes. "Neither do we." Harlan, from his bed, made a sound that might have been a laugh. "No," he said. His voice was rough, but certain. "No, you certainly don't." Holt rode away, and the danger rode with him, but not all of it. Evelyn knew that before Cole said it, and Cole said it that evening at the kitchen table, with Decker and Perkins, and the signed Pete documents spread flat under the lamplight, like a map of something they'd barely survived. "Reginald Hale lost the linchpin," Cole said. "He didn't lose the money or the lawyer or the appetite." He looked around the table. "This isn't finished." "What's his next move?" Decker asked. "He has 3 options," Evelyn said. Everyone looked at her. She'd been thinking about it for the 6 hours since they'd left Harlan's ranch, turning Reginald Hale's mind over in her hands, the way she turned account discrepancies looking for where the logic ran. He abandons the corridor scheme entirely, which cost him the Denver investment relationship and his credibility with Holt. He pivots to legal challenge, tries to contest the Pete transfer on some procedural ground. Or he comes at us directly. Directly how, Decker said. Pressure, the kind that doesn't leave paper. She paused. He has a freight operation. He controls what moves through Silverdale. If he decides Barrett Ranch is a problem worth solving, he has tools that don't show up in a territorial court. The table was quiet. He could cut our supply lines, Moss said from the far end. It was the first time Moss had spoken in a meeting like this, and the room registered it. A man who'd spent 2 months protecting his territory had just voluntarily stepped into the larger problem. Most of our winter stores come through Silverdale Freight. Not anymore, Evelyn said. I've been building alternative sourcing since week 3. Millbrook has 2 suppliers who can handle most of our staples. The Eastern Settlement Post handles the rest. She looked at Moss. I moved us off Silverdale Freight dependency 6 weeks ago, quietly. Moss stared at her. You knew this was coming 6 weeks ago. I knew the letter from Damien was a positioning move, she said. I didn't know the full shape of it yet, but I knew we shouldn't be dependent on Silverdale for anything while the Hale family was watching us. Perkins made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the same territory. He looked at Cole with the expression of a man confirming something he'd already decided. Cole looked back at him with the expression of a man who knew exactly what Perkins was thinking and didn't disagree. What about the legal challenge? Cole asked. Can he contest the transfer? Aldous is already filing the documentation, Evelyn said. The transfer was clean, fair price, clear instrument, witness signatures, Harlan fully competent at time of signing. Clara will testify to his competence if needed. She paused. A territorial judge looks at that and sees no grounds. The only thing Holt could argue is procedural timing, and we beat the enforcement window by 40 days. She folded her hands on the table. He has no legal case, which leaves coming at us directly, Cole said. Yes, she said. Cole looked at Decker. What do we need? We're good on the night watch, Decker said. I want 2 more men on the north fence rotation. The Pete parcel shares that boundary. Now we need eyes on it. Hire them, Cole said. Evelyn, can the budget carry 2 more hands through winter? She'd already run the numbers. She'd run them yesterday on the ride home from Harlan's in her head, because that was how her mind worked now. Always one problem ahead, always building the framework before the walls came up. Yes, if we adjust the spring supply order, we have room. She paused. I already drafted the adjustment. Cole looked at her across the table. That look again, the one she'd learned to read, the one that lived in the territory beneath the words. Of course you did, he said. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was as close as Cole Barrett got in a room full of people, and every man at that table knew it, and nobody said anything about it, because these were men who understood that some things were communicated by what you didn't say. The legal challenge came anyway. 2 weeks later, a writer from Millbrook delivered a formal notice. Territorial Land and Timber Associates was contesting the Pete transfer on the grounds that the signing had occurred under duress, that Harlan Pete had been in a compromised physical state, and that the presence of armed men at the property at the time of signing constituted coercion. Evelyn read the notice standing in the kitchen doorway. Then she read it again. Then she set it flat on the table and said, He's claiming we coerced Harlan. Cole read it. His face did the thing where it went very still. Armed men, Decker said, reading over Cole's shoulder. We were armed. That's true. Every man in Montana rides armed, Evelyn said. If carrying a rifle constitutes coercion, half the land transfers in this territory are contestable. She was already thinking past the anger which was there. She felt it, a bright, clean anger at the audacity of a man using the law as a weapon against the truth. But the anger wasn't useful yet. Thinking was useful. We need Clara. Her testimony about Harlan's state of mind is the center of this. Clara will testify, Cole said. He set the notice down. Will she hold up under Holt? Yes, Evelyn said, without hesitation. She'd sat with Clara for 2 hours at Harlan's ranch. She knew exactly what kind of woman Clara was, the kind who'd been tending a dying man for months out of pure conscience and had no investment in anything except the truth. Holt will try to rattle her and find out she doesn't rattle, "I'll ride to Aldous today," Cole said. "He needs to see this and tell us which judge handles territorial contests." "Judge Morrow," Evelyn said. Cole looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Aldous mentioned him when we first brought him the purchase agreement. He said Morrow was the territorial standard for land disputes and that he valued clean documentation over legal argument." She paused. "Which is why I made sure every piece of our documentation is clean enough to eat off." A sound from Decker's direction that was definitely a laugh this time quickly contained. Cole stared at her for a moment. "I'll send a wire to Aldous instead of riding," he said. "I don't want you here without me right now." She noticed he'd said here without me, and not alone. The distinction mattered. She filed it. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I know," he said. He stopped. "I know," she said back, gently, and she did. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out in Millbrook before Judge Morrow. Aldous prepared the documentation with the meticulous precision of a man who had spent 40 years understanding that paper won more arguments than passion. Evelyn helped him build the chronology, every date, every signature, every witness, every communication that established the timeline of the Pete transfer as clean, willing, and legally sound. She wrote to Clara twice. Clara wrote back both times in the careful hand of someone who'd taught herself to write as an adult and treated every letter like it cost something. She said Harlan was holding. She said Harlan had told her to tell Evelyn that he didn't regret a thing, which Clara had written with 3 exclamation points, which made Evelyn smile in a way she didn't bother to hide. The McCabe brothers sent word that they'd completed their corridor usage documentation. Lundgren sent his own records in a bundle that was organized so precisely that Aldous told Cole it was the best prepared supporting documentation he'd seen in 30 years of land recording. Whitfield Gerald. Whitfield, the skeptical son, sent his records 10 days before the deadline, accompanied by a brief letter that said simply, "My father says we should have trusted the Barretts sooner. He's usually right about these things." Evelyn read that letter and put it in the documentation file, and then sat for a moment thinking about old Mr. Whitfield, whom she'd never met, making a judgment from a distance, about people his son had been suspicious of. She thought about the specific kind of wisdom that came from having lived long enough to know that suspicion and caution were different things, and that the right people, when they showed up, were worth the risk. She was beginning to accumulate her own version of that wisdom. She was beginning to understand that it built slowly, day by day, decision by decision, in the space between who you'd been and who the circumstances were making you. 3 weeks before the hearing, Damien Hale came to Barrett Ranch. Not Reginald, not Holt. Damien himself, which was either a sign that Reginald had run out of better options or a sign that Damien had made a decision independent of his father, and Evelyn wasn't sure which possibility was more dangerous. She was in the kitchen when Decker came in and said there was a rider at the gate who'd given his name, and the name had made Decker's face do something careful and controlled. She went to the yard. Cole was already there. Damien Hale was 30 years old and had the kind of face that had always been constructed for impression, symmetrical, deliberately arranged, designed to telegraph trustworthiness. Evelyn had spent a year believing in that face. Standing in the yard of Barrett Ranch, with the winter-hard ground under her boots and Cole's shoulder 4 feet to her right, she looked at it and felt almost nothing, which surprised her less than she expected. "Evelyn," Damien said. "Mr. Hale," she said. He absorbed that, looked at Cole. "Mr. Barrett, I appreciate you not turning me off at the gate." "You have 2 minutes," Cole said. "Say what you came to say." Damien looked at Evelyn. "I didn't know about the company," he said. "My father's land scheme, the corridor, the parcels. I didn't know." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "You sent me a letter telling me about the Pete parcel debt, because my father asked me to. He told me it was a courtesy that you deserved to know since you were affected." Damien's jaw tightened. "I didn't know what he was doing. I found out 3 weeks ago when Holt filed the coercion challenge. My father told me what the company was, what the plan had been." A pause. He told me he'd used my relationship with you as a distraction." "He told you," Cole said. "He thought I'd be proud of the strategy." Damien said it with the specific controlled disgust of a man who had just irrevocably rewritten his understanding of someone he'd believed he knew. He was wrong. The yard was very quiet. A cold wind moved through it and went away again. "What do you want?" Evelyn asked. "I want to testify," Damien said. "At the hearing, about the letter, about what my father told me to write and why." He met her eyes. "The coercion claim is false. You didn't coerce Harlan Pete. My father orchestrated a scheme and used me to do part of it, and I'm not—" He stopped. "I'm not willing to let that stand." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 32 minutes in a church. She thought about 4 miles of road. She thought about how much of her life had been shaped by decisions this man made and didn't make, and how completely different the shape of her life was now from anything she would have predicted standing in that vestibule. "Why should I trust you?" she said. "You shouldn't," Damien said, directly without hedging. "I don't have standing to ask you to trust me. I'm asking you to use what I can offer, not to trust the person offering it." He paused. "That's a distinction you'd understand." She looked at Cole. Cole looked at her. Something passed between them. Not words, not even clear thought, just the particular current that had been building between them for months and had become by now as natural as breathing. "Talk to Aldous," Cole said. "If he thinks your testimony strengthens the case, you testify." He looked at Damien with the level unbothered assessment of a man who had decided something and wasn't interested in revisiting the decision. "This isn't about Evelyn and you. It's about what's true." "That's all I'm offering," Damien said. "Then we have an understanding," Cole said. Damien looked at Evelyn one last time. She saw in his face the specific expression of a man arriving too late, and at significant personal cost, at an accurate understanding of something he'd underestimated. She didn't feel sorry for him exactly, but she didn't feel the anger she'd expected either. She felt mostly very far away from the woman who'd believed in that face. "I'm sorry," Damien said. "For all of it." "I know," she said, "and then because it was true, I don't need it anymore, but I know." He rode out. Cole stood beside her until the sound of the horse faded. Then, "You all right?" "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. "I'm entirely all right." And she found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning, which was the most ordinary Tuesday the ranch had seen in 2 months. No riders, no letters, no legal notices. Just the kitchen and the cold and the accounts, and Hattie moving around the stove with her systematic bad knee management. She didn't tell Hattie first, even though Hattie had been the one who suspected it before Evelyn consciously admitted it to herself. She didn't tell Decker or Perkins or any of the men. She waited until that evening when the kitchen had emptied out, and Cole came in from the last check of the day and poured his coffee and sat down at the table, and the ranch was quiet around them in the particular way it was quiet at 9 o'clock on ordinary Tuesdays. She set down her pen, looked at him across the table. "I need to tell you something," she said. Cole set down his coffee. He looked at her with the full attention he gave to things that mattered, which was the same attention he gave to a compromised fence line, or a sick animal complete, unhurried, ready for whatever the information was. "I'm pregnant," she said. The kitchen was very still. Cole looked at her, and then something happened in his face that she had never seen happen before, not in 4 months of watching him manage crises and make decisions and contain things that other men would have let show. His face opened. Not dramatically, not with any of the performance she'd learned to distrust in other people. It opened the way a door opens when someone has been on the other side of it for a long time and finally turns the handle. "Are you sure?" he said. His voice was different, rougher at the edges. "Yes," she said. "I've been sure for about 2 weeks. I wanted to be certain before I said it." He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough that she started to read its edges. Not absence, not hesitation, but the silence of a man experiencing something large and needing to find the right size container for it. "Are you all right?" he said. Is everything? "I'm fine," she said. "Healthy? Tired in the mornings, but Hattie's been making me eat before I get up, which helps." She paused. "I think Hattie has known for 10 days. Cole made a sound. "Of course she has." "She didn't say anything," Evelyn said. "She just started leaving biscuits on the nightstand." Cole looked at his hands on the table for a moment. Then he looked at her directly with the unguarded honesty that was his most constant quality, the thing she'd trusted before she'd trusted anything else about him. "I wasn't sure I'd have this again," he said. "After—" He stopped. "You don't have to," she said. "I want to." He met her eyes. "I had a daughter, Emma. She's 7 now, in Oregon with her mother." His voice was level, but not easy, the voice of a wound that had scar tissue over it, functional and permanent. "I missed her growing up. I made choices that made Margaret leave, and I've had 4 years to understand which choices those were." A pause. "I don't intend to make them again." Evelyn held his gaze. "What choices?" "The ranch over everything else," he said. "Every time there was a decision between what the ranch needed and what Margaret needed, I chose the ranch. I told myself I was choosing the future. I was choosing the familiar." He paused. "I knew how to run a ranch. I didn't know how to—" He stopped again. "Stay present," she said quietly. "Yes." He looked at her. "You've been teaching me that, without calling it that." She thought about all the evenings at the kitchen table. The morning he'd said, "Teach me about the accounts." The night he'd put his hand over hers and held it without needing to explain why. The way he'd said together when she'd asked how they'd handle Holt, like the word was the most obvious word in the world. "You've been learning it," she said. "I didn't teach you anything you weren't already willing to learn." Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table, the same gesture she'd made weeks ago, her hand flat in offering. His hand covered hers. Certain. Warm. "This child is going to know its father," he said. "Not a wish. A decision. The way Cole Barrett made all his real decisions quietly, completely without performance." "I know," she said. "I know that." The hearing before Judge Morrow lasted 2 days. Aldous presented the documentation. Clara testified with the unshakable clarity of someone who had nothing to protect except the truth, and Holt's cross-examination bounced off her like rain off a barn roof. The McCabe's and Lundgren and Gerald Whitfield all testified to their established corridor usage. Aldous walked Judge Morrow through the company, filing the 4 parcel claims, the timeline that proved the scheme predated the Pete transfer by months. And then Damian Hale testified. He sat in front of Judge Morrow and told the truth about his father's instructions, about the letter he'd been asked to write, about what Reginald had told him the night Holt filed the coercion claim. He said it in the flat, careful voice of someone who understood exactly what it cost and had decided to pay it anyway. Holt objected 3 times. Morrow overruled him 3 times, and by the 3rd overruling, Holt had the expression of a man who had seen the shape of the outcome and was already building his exit. Evelyn sat beside Cole in that hearing room and watched Damian testify, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not gratitude exactly, and not vindication. Something more like the quiet satisfaction of a ledger that finally balances. Every column in its right place. Every number accounted for. The truth of the thing visible from all angles. Judge Morrow ruled the following morning. The coercion claim was dismissed. The Pete transfer stood. Territorial Land and Timber Associates was found to have engaged in a coordinated pattern of land acquisition designed to establish monopolistic control of the corridor, which the judge noted was contrary to territorial property law in 3 specific provisions that Aldous had identified and Evelyn had helped him articulate in the documentation. The Denver Investment Group withdrew from the company within a week. Without their backing, Reginald Hale's corridor scheme collapsed. The 2 settled parcels he'd already acquired reverted to negotiation under the territorial ruling, and within a month, both were purchased by the ranches that had historically used them. The corridor stayed open. The 4 ranches that depended on it kept what they'd always had. Reginald Hale never came to Barrett Ranch. He sent no more letters. He made no more moves. Whether this was prudence or defeat, or the specific exhaustion of a man whose scheme had been dismantled from the inside by his own son Evelyn, didn't know and didn't particularly need to know. She closed that chapter the way she closed a balanced ledger, with the clean final satisfaction of a line drawn under correct numbers, and then she turned to the next page. Spring came to Barrett Ranch the way it always did, not gently, but with the particular insistence of something that has been held back long enough and is no longer willing to wait. The mud, the green underneath the mud, the horses coming alive in the paddocks, the men's voices gaining a different energy in the mornings. Evelyn stood at the kitchen window on the first morning that genuinely felt like spring, and put her hand flat against her stomach, and felt the small, insistent reality of what was growing there. And she thought about everything that had happened in the 7 months since a man on a horse had asked if she was alive. Hattie came in and set a cup of tea at her elbow without being asked, which was Hattie's version of tenderness. "The biscuits are on the counter," Hattie said. "Eat them before Cole comes in and eats them himself." "He doesn't eat the biscuits," Evelyn said. "He absolutely eats the biscuits," Hattie said. "He just does it when he thinks I'm not watching." Evelyn smiled, drank the tea, ate the biscuits. Outside she could hear Cole at the barn, his voice low and even, talking to Cutter, the way he talked to things he cared about with a patience and consistency he'd learned to bring inside as well. Decker appeared in the doorway. "Supply rider's here, 2 days early." "I know," she said. "I asked him to come early. The spring order needs to go out before the north road clears, or we lose 2 weeks of timing." She handed Decker the prepared order from the kitchen shelf where she'd set it last night. "Give him this, and tell him the Millbrook supplier gets priority over Silverdale on everything except the salt delivery." Decker took the order, looked at it, looked at her. "You wrote this last night." "I write everything before I need it," she said. "That's the whole point." Decker almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went. Moss appeared 10 seconds later. "The spring grain inventory is on the table," she said. "Second page, winter to spring transition column. Cross-reference it with the new rotation schedule before you sign off." Moss picked it up, looked at it, set it back down. "You know," he said, "I used to think this job was harder before you got here." "It wasn't harder," she said. "It was just disorganized." "That's what I mean," he said, and walked out, which from Moss was approximately the equivalent of a standing ovation. Cole came in for coffee at 7:15 and stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since November, with the specific quality of attention that had no agenda in it, no assessment, just presence, just the fact of her being there and him noticing it. "Ryder came early," he said. "I know. I asked him to. Spring order. Already handled." She poured his coffee, handed it across. "The north fence crew needs to start on the peat parcel boundary this week. The thaw's going to expose some gaps." "I know. I'm sending Briggs and Tommy." "Briggs's hands are steadier now," she said. "I noticed." Cole looked at her. "When did you notice that?" 3 weeks ago. He's been working the stable work instead of the wire, and his hands have calmed down." She looked at him over her own coffee. "He's ready to go back to the fence line if he wants to." Cole was quiet for a moment, in the particular way he was quiet when something had moved him and he was finding where to put it. "You've been watching him," he said. "I watch everyone," she said. "It's how I know what's needed before it's needed." He looked at her, the full, unhurried look. "You do that for all of them?" "Yes." "You've been doing it since the first week," he said. "You were watching all of them to understand what they needed, not to manage them to understand them." She hadn't framed it that way before, but it was accurate. "Yes," she said. Cole set his coffee down. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put his hands on her face carefully, the way he did everything that mattered, and he kissed her. not for the first time, but with the same quality as the first time, deliberate, certain entirely, without ambiguity. When he stepped back, she looked at him with the small smile she'd developed specifically for him, the one that didn't require explanation. "What was that for?" she said. "Because I wanted to," he said. "And because you were watching everyone else this whole winter, and nobody was watching you." She looked at him for a moment. "You were watching me," she said. "Yes," he said. "I was." On a Sunday in late April, the 4 ranch families whose land bordered the corridor, the Barretts, the McCabe's, the Lundgrens, and the Whitfields, gathered at Barrett Ranch for what Evelyn organized, and Decker called a meeting, and Hattie called a party, and Perkins called overdue. Old Mr. Whitfield came in a wagon with his son Gerald, and when Gerald helped his father out of the wagon, the old man walked to Evelyn directly with the specific intentionality of someone who'd made up his mind about something long before they arrived. "You're the one who connected the parcels," he said. He was 81 years old and had the eyes of someone who'd been paying attention since before most of the people present were born. "I had the document from Clara," Evelyn said, "and Aldis's records." "You had the document," Whitfield said. "Other people had documents. They didn't see what you saw." He extended his hand. "I owe you an apology for my son's suspicion and a thank you for what you did anyway." She shook his hand. "Gerald was right to be cautious," she said. "Caution is reasonable. He came around when it counted." Whitfield looked at her for a moment. "My wife was like you," he said. "Saw things clear, built things to last." He paused. "Cole Barrett's a lucky man." "We're both lucky," she said. Whitfield smiled, the real kind, the kind that reached everything. "Yes," he said. "That's the right answer." The day ran long and easy. The kind of gathering that has work underneath it, but isn't only work, where the practical conversation about the corridor and the spring season and the supply arrangements braided naturally into food and laughter, and the particular warmth of people who've been through something hard together and come out knowing they can trust each other. Finn McCabe told a story about their first Montana winter that had everyone within earshot laughing before he reached the end of it. Lundgren's wife, who spoke precise formal English with a Swedish cadence that made everything she said sound like it had been carefully considered, told Evelyn that she had heard about the Millbrook hearing and found it very satisfying, the way proper things are satisfying. Decker and Roy McCabe discovered they'd both worked the same cattle drive in Wyoming 12 years ago, and spent an hour establishing this in the methodical cross-referencing way of men comparing history. Perkins sat beside old Mr. Whitfield for most of the afternoon, and whatever they talked about with the ease of men who'd earned their gray hairs and didn't need to impress each other with anything. Evelyn moved through it all, talking, organizing, listening, watching. And at some point in the middle of the afternoon, she stopped moving and stood still for a moment and looked at the yard full of people and noise and the particular alive quality of a community that has just found out it is one. Cole appeared at her shoulder. He didn't say anything. He stood beside her and looked at the same thing she was looking at. "You built this," he said finally. "We built it," she said. "The hearing, the documentation, connecting the ranches." He paused. "You built that." "And you bought the Pete parcel," she said, and shook Harlan's hand and meant it, and stood at the gate when Holt came and held the line. She looked at him. "We built it." He looked back at her, nodded once. The slow, certain nod of a man accepting a true thing. She put her hand in his. He held it without ceremony, without comment, the way he held everything that mattered to him, like he intended to keep it. That evening, after the families had gone, and the men had drifted to the bunkhouse, and Hattie had retired with her knees and her satisfaction, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with the accounts open and the lamp lit and her hand moving down the columns of spring numbers. The ranch was sound. Not wealthy. There was still 2 years of clawing back ahead of them, still decisions to make and margins to manage. But sound. Structurally sound, the way Harlan Pete had described a good fence line. Not because nothing could break it, but because the posts were deep and the wire was taut, and you'd looked at every joint and knew where the strength lived. She ran the spring projections, wrote the adjustments, closed the ledger. Cole came in at 9, sat across from her, poured his coffee without asking if she wanted any, and poured hers too, and set it at her elbow the way he'd been setting it since November, with the absolute unself-consciousness of a habit that has become essential. She wrapped her hands around the mug, looked at him across the table. She thought about the woman who had sat in the mud at the side of a road 7 months ago with $6.40 and nothing else. She thought about the 32 minutes in the church. She thought about the 4 miles in the rain and the stranger's kitchen and the cup of coffee and the most practical marriage proposal she had ever heard, which had turned out to be the most honest thing anyone had ever offered her. She thought about what she was now, what they were now. This kitchen, this ranch, these men who had become her people, this man across the table who watched her when she wasn't looking and learned from her and protected her and let himself be seen by her and was going to be the father of her child with the full decided commitment of someone who had learned the cost of half measures. She thought about Reginald Hale, who had calculated her as leverage and found out she was a load-bearing wall. She thought about Damien, who had sat in that hearing room and told the truth at his own expense, and who she had looked at across the years of what he'd done and felt finally only distance. She thought about Harlan Pete signing his name with a shaking hand, and Clara with her 3 exclamation points, and Aldous Cross saying, "You look like your mother, and Perkins, and his grandmother, and Decker from Tennessee, and Moss, and his supply knowledge, and Tommy who'd been scared of a cougar and learned not to be scared of much anymore, and Hattie with the biscuits on the nightstand, and old Mr. Whitfield saying my wife was like you." She thought about all of it and felt the specific durable satisfaction of someone who had not gotten what she expected and had gotten something true instead. "What are you thinking?" Cole said. She looked at him. "That I'm glad the lamp ran out," she said. He looked at her for a moment, not quite understanding. Then she saw him find the thread back to the beginning, to the first night, the lamp oil in the dark kitchen, and the accounting work that had started all of it. Something moved through his face. Warm and real and entirely his. "So am I," he said. Outside, the Montana spring was doing what Montana spring did, cold and insistent, and full of the kind of beauty that didn't ask your permission. The horses shifted in the paddock. The creek that ran through the Pete parcel, their parcel now moved with the sound of snowmelt. The ranch breathed around them, in the dark, steady and alive, the way it had breathed through every hard night and every good one. Evelyn Barrett sat at the kitchen table across from her husband in the light of a lamp with plenty of oil. And she was home, not the home you are given, but the home you build, board by board, decision by decision, out of honesty and work, and the particular courage of choosing to stay and make something real out of the raw material of what you've been handed. She had walked 4 miles in the rain to get here, and she would walk 400 more, and she would not change a single step. That was the truth of it. That was all of it. That was enough.